in the context of overall property tax administration. If there's one thing that we know in our office, we know that it's really complicated. We use a lot of jargon. So if I say anything that you don't understand, put up your hand and say, what did you mean right there? Because we know we're just using these words over and over again, and everyone that we work with gets it. But then we forget when we're trying to explain it to others that maybe you haven't heard it before. Some of you might remember when Prop 13 passed. It was a year after I actually started in the business as a junior appraiser. Prop 13 was a really simplistic constitutional amendment. It's the kind of thing you live for. It said, all property in California will have a base year value established at its market value as of March 1st, 1975, unless the property or portion thereof has a change in ownership or new construction. Once a base year value has been established, it cannot be increased by more than 2% or the change in the California Consumer Price Index, whichever is less. And over the last 30 years, I can remember 6 times that it's been less than 2%. What Prop 13 didn't envision was that the market might actually go down. So shortly thereafter, there was a proposition, Prop 8, that's what we call it. Prop 8 said that it's incumbent on the assessor to ensure that they enroll the lesser of current market value or factored base year value. So once you get that factored base year value established, it's going up by 2% per year. Well, what happens if the market starts to go down and it crosses? At that point, it's our responsibility to enroll the lesser of those two values. This year, what we did was we identified transfers or changes of ownership, however, whatever word you want to use for it, and new homes that were constructed in 2004, 2005, and 2006 in Calaveras County. We used those parameters because our appraisers told us that that was the time frame during which they thought those properties might be affected by the current market conditions. In other words, current market conditions might be less than we had them assessed for. We did not use 2007, and you might wonder why. The answer is because it was the 2007 data that we were using to come up with the values for the 2008 roll. So it was unlikely using the same data against itself was going to result in a reduction. But next year, when we're doing the 2009 assessment roll, we're probably going to now then loop in 2007 and maybe even have to loop in a little back. As Randy said, we identified over 11,000 parcels county-wide that might have fallen into new construction or a change of ownership during the 3 years that I mentioned. And we did what we call a mass appraisal review of those. So essentially, and I'm going to use Rancho as an example, I happen to live here in Rancho, so it's really easy for me to talk about, and it's fairly easy for me to explain to you what the appraisers did. Are most of you residents of Rancho or coming from other areas? Okay, well, all right, got a few of you. In Rancho, we've got 3 property types. We've got half acre, acre, and 3 acres. So we segmented the market data in those half acre, acre, and 3 acre divisions. And then we looked at what properties would sell for in the half acre market, in the acre market, and in the 3 acre market. Once we found those ranges of values per square foot, we compared what was being assessed on, I'll just pick Alice's property, okay? Let's say, in fact, let me just make somebody up. Let's say somebody had a 1,500 square foot house on an acre, and we said, and I'm really making this up because I want to do the math in my head, okay? And we said that it should sell for $200 per square foot. 200 times 1,500 is 300,000. We would then compare that number to what it was assessed for, and if it was assessed for more than the 300,000, then we lowered it. If it was assessed for less than the 300,000, we didn't lower it at all. The thing that we're finding is confusing folks is the law requires us to consider the appraisal unit. Now here we're really going to get into some technical jargon. The appraisal unit is what sells in the marketplace. You don't sell your lot to one person and your house to someone else. You sell the lot and the house in the market. So even though you might have a really low land value and a high improvement value, we had to look at the total dollars. And then when we did a Prop 8 reduction, your land value might have actually gone up, but your improvement value might have gone down, and a lower number then would be enrolled. And that is confusing folks who are getting letters. I took a week of vacation last week, and I can tell you that that's when they know the letters.
That was on purpose, by the way.
Yeah, I knew those phone calls would be rolling on in. I got my Prop 8 notice. I happen to be one of those people who bought almost at the height of the market. There was no way to predict it. Certainly if I had a crystal ball, I'd be wealthy and probably not working for government, but I missed it. So I got my Prop 8 notice on Wednesday or Thursday last week. And the first thing my husband said was, our property's not worth as much as we paid for it. So we know we're also getting that kind of question as well. How is it that you came up with the number? What happens with my mortgage company? Because some folks have their mortgage company taking out their property taxes into an impound account. Those are all the kinds of questions that we would expect you might have here tonight. But the first thing I wanted to do was explain to you what we did, how we did it, and why we did it. What happens next? Once a property goes on Prop 8, then we're required by law to review it every year. The valuation date that we use is January 1st. That's what we call the lien date. So the value that that's going to show on your tax bill this year is your factored base year value effective January 1st, 2008. The complication here is, you know, the market's continuing to go down. And those are the taxes you're going to be paying in December. It's based on an almost year-old value. And that's a really hard thing to keep in context. Next year, for the January 1st, 2009 roll value, we're going to have to look at all 5,244 that we actually reduced, plus the others that we think would now loop in under any kind of reduction. And what we'll do every year, if a property has gone on a Prop 8 reduction, is we will compare current market value to what it's being assessed for, to what its factored base year value is. Now, the factored base year value is continuing to go up to 2% per year, sort of in the background in the computer system. So the computer's going to tell us, here's the factored base year value, and we're going to know what the current market value is, and we're going to compare those numbers. When the factored base year value gets lower than current market, it will be restored. This is very bad news for someone like me, who maybe got a $50,000 or $60,000 reduction. The year that it goes up, I'm going to get a $50,000 or $60,000 increase in 1 year. Which means my property taxes are going to go up 1% of that.
It's going to go up right where they should be. It's going to maintain itself.
Exactly.
Sure.
Exactly. But it's a shock. For those of you who get the reduction, it's a shock the year that we restore the factored base year value. And the last time we did this was in the early part of this decade. I still haven't figured out how you're supposed to say this. The 2000s? Yes.
I have a problem, and I tried to get it through. I talked to different people in your department, and I received some papers, and they were very expedient about returning everything. I have a property that has 3 acres, and apparently there hasn't been enough of that on the market, or they were sold at inflated prices, that I'm not getting the tax relief. I bought it $375 in 2005, right at the end of it, and it's appraised now at $390, and it's staying there. You know, that's the well. No market. I don't see it.
We do have a market. We do have a market for 3-acre parcels. I happen to be on a 3-acre parcel. What we're finding in ranchos, the 3-acre parcels are the ones that are the more desirable pieces. And so those properties are actually showing higher market value.
Well, yours was reduced $50,000, though, you have a 3-acre parcel?
Yeah,
and
that's what my husband overpaying for it originally.
Yeah, it's 1,592 square
That's
feet.
true, I didn't sign anything.
You know, it's an 18, 20-year-old home. I mean, it's nice, it's a nice home. I put a lot of work and time and effort into it, but it doesn't reflect the value of the new homes on 3 acres that are here. And if I were to put it on the market and you were to look at it, you'd be telling me, oh, I won't give you over 300 for it, 310, whatever.
Well, the thing that we would encourage...
But I mean, compared to your newer
time constraints. They did not factor in swimming pools. So if they were looking at your property and you had a pool, they assumed you did not. Okay? So in many cases, that might actually help you a bit. But here's what I can tell you you can do if you disagree. In other words, let's say you haven't gotten a letter and you really think you should have had a letter. Two things. First, call us and ask if you were put on prop 8 status. I'm hoping that if you were and you don't have the letter, the first question you're going to be asked is what your mailing address is. There's this little known piece of the law that says it's your responsibility to ensure that we know your mailing address. So if you don't have a letter yet, and we know they were mailed out last week, they sure as heck should be in Valley Springs by now. If you don't have a letter yet, give us a call and make sure we've got the right mailing address. Now, if then you discover we've got the right mailing address and weren't put under Prop 8, we've instructed our appraisers to look and see whether or not you should have been. If you should have been, they're authorized to work a rule correction. If they still think you should not have been, you have the right to file an assessment appeal. And let me talk to you about that process really quickly. You can file an assessment appeal if you disagree with us between July 2nd and November 30th. I'm going to say those dates again. They are very strict. You have from July 2nd to November 30th. If you filed your appeal on July 1st, it would not be heard. If you file your appeal on December 10th, it will not be timely filed. So if you disagree with us, you can file an appeal. There is no charge to file an assessment appeal. And what that will do is that will trigger in our office a set of steps to look at it and say, okay, let's check this again one more time. If we still disagree, we will defend that appeal. Yes, sir.
I was told that I had to find some common properties. I might have been one of you that I talked to, that I had to look around to find some. They're not selling the 3-acre parcel, so one above the hill, it's over 3,000 square feet, it's brand new, but it's 640,000. You know, I mean, 3,500 square feet.
I dare say that if you talk to a realtor, they're going to know some comps that you could use. Here's the kicker. There are a bazillion kickers here. There are so many little intricate rules that overlap that it's really hard to keep track of them. So I'm going to tell you what they are as they pop into my head. Let's say you file an assessment appeal and you say, I think the value of my property on January 1st, 2008 was $225,000, and you have some comparable sales. If you introduce evidence of comparable sales that sold after March 31st of 2008, they'll be rejected because the law doesn't allow anything 90 days after the valuation date. And the valuation date is January 1st. So you can bet we know that, because we're defending appeals right and left. I'm sure you think we're defending appeals all the time, but really we're not.
Would you explain why you're looking at me?
The Board of Supervisors sits as the Board of Equalization. So once a quarter, they sit and they hear assessment appeals that are scheduled. Yes, sir.
What were the dates for the appeal? I think you said July 2nd.
July 2nd to November 30th. And the appeal has to be filed with the clerk of the board, which is over in the recorder's office. So if you're thinking about calling, don't call us, call them. The number is 754-6372.
This is an official appeal before the board.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just missed the window. I final construction in January of 07. And so the letter I got was significant increase in taxes. And so I went into the assessor's office and asked them about that, and they gave me a form. And I talked to the appraiser, and I didn't really pay attention to the form. And they said they were going to take a look at it again. And I had some evidence, but not. I didn't realize that I should go in, with comps. Is that sufficient to have my property looked at?
Well, what's likely to happen in your case, and in fact,
But just missed the window by 20
they're going
days.
to call you and they're going to say, I'd like to come out and see the property, because there's a pretty good chance, given the workloads that we've had and the shortcuts we've been taking over the years, that they haven't been in it.
Right.
So they're going to call and say, we'd like to come out and see it. And if they have any questions, they're going to take the opportunity then to ask you the questions that they might have. Now, let's say, for some reason, they don't get around to getting you an answer in a timely fashion. You still have until November 30th to file an appeal. And what I'd like everybody to know is you can file the appeal while you're waiting for us to do something. You can withdraw the appeal at no cost. So you can file it at no cost, you can withdraw it at no cost. It's a protection of your right. You cannot go into the board and say, well, I waited till January because the assessor was supposed to call me back. The deadline is the deadline. So since you're sitting here,
So we have till November, effectively.
yeah, till November
Right,
30th.
so we're in a live period now.
Yes, you are. Yes, sir.
What is the deadline restraint on you folks? You told us what restraints we have as far as the window goes.
Mhm.
Tell me what you have to, is there a certain period of time that you have to respond by?
Statutorily, no.
So you can just
Yes,
ignore it?
yes.
Okay.
Internally, we have policies about how long these are supposed to take.
Then I get on his case, right?
Right.
Thank you.
And actually, you want to get on my case before you get on his case?
No.
Seriously.
The buck stops there.
Because I need to know, and I'll put my cards up here, you can take one if you'd like. I need to know if our staff is not working on a review for some reason.
Well, you're gonna get your handful this year, I believe.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a good chance of it.
Yeah.
But this is part of the job. You know, we have up years.
But you got no
we have
limit, no time limit restraints on you folks, but you put up time restraint on us.
Not
So
by
to me, it's
staff.
not that really fair as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, sir.
I filed an appeal before I got the letter,
Okay.
so the numbers are going to be different. Do I need to file a new appeal, or?
You can amend your appeal anytime up until the final date of filing. So between now and November 30th, you can file your appeal.
But it should be amended.
Amended, yes. And it should be amended in
Which I was
writing.
told different.
Really?
Yes.
By someone in my office?
No, this was in the supervisor's office.
Okay.
Told me it wasn't.
No, you can, but you gotta understand, they don't deal with appeals as much as we do. And I'll give you a little bit of my background. I haven't been in Calaveras County for my entire career. I started my career in Contra Costa County. I spent 2 years as the assessor's representative before the appeals board. In Contra Costa County, the appeals were held every week, and every Thursday morning, I had at least 20 to 25 appeals to defend for that department, and I did that for 2 years. So these dates come real easy to me. They don't come easy to many of the folks in our office, and they sure don't come easy to the folks at the clerk of the board. They're just very arcane rules. We'll go here and then back there and then over.
You mentioned that the factor value keeps just chugging along at 2%. That's a maximum of 2%, and you said 2%. Now that only occurs when the inflationary index is at least 2%. Is that
And the
correct?
California Consumer Price Index is 2%. And that is determined by the State Board of Equalization. They send us a letter every year. Now last year, you would think, the way the market was tanking, that the California Consumer Price Index didn't go up 2%. And you would be thinking wrong. The letter we got from the State Board of Equalization told us that last year's inflation factor was 2%.
So it's the inflationary factor been going up 2%, at least 2% for the past several years?
It has been going up no more than 2%.
No, I mean the value factor. I'm talking about the inflationary increase.
You mean the California Consumer
Yeah.
Price Index or the factor that we use?
No, inflationary, consumer price index.
It's been going up at least 2%.
So that's why you use 2%.
Yeah, 3 years ago, I think it was 1.8.
We had to use 1
So we used 1.8.
But generally speaking, for our purposes, we can just assume it's going to be 2%.
Yeah, that's what I do. It's, it's just easy in your head to have it going up 2%. I think I was doing.
A minute or two ago, you talked about the evaluation date for comparables, and you used a March date, but I think it would be any date from January 1st, 08 forward would be no good, correct?
No, from January 1st, 08 to March 31st, 08, you can't use anything after March 31st. You could go to October of 07, okay? You could go to July of 07, but you can't go more than 90 days after the valuation date, which is January 1st.
No,
And before that would be another 90 days, or?
Well, the only other time you would veer from, and we're talking Prop A, the valuation date is January 1st. when this gentleman over here who had the January of '07, your 90 days would then be in April. So I think you said 20th?
Mhm.
It would be April 20th of '07 if you were looking at your base year value.
If we have a formal appraisal, we can use that as well.
You can certainly submit it to us. Let me tell you what we do. We have folks come in all the time, say, hey, I got an appraisal. You know, some of you got an appraisal because you were refinancing. Some people got an appraisal because they hired an appraiser and they thought they needed to. We will look at it and we will tell you which of the comparables we're going to reject because of the date. Okay, so we'll just flat out say, your comparables 2 and 3 were in April and May, and we're not going to use those. We can look at your comparable number 1. The gentleman in the black shirt and then behind you.
Okay, well, that leaves two things open for me, if I can. The first one is, my understanding is you cannot comp to properties that are distressed properties that have been sold. That's what you told me.
Has to be in a
But they're
public market
determining the
transaction.
market now, though. That's the problem. They are what is determining the
I
cost.
started a formal market, yeah.
And my second, what was really my first one was, at what point does your income, is there any tax relief for people where your income reaches a point I'm just saying,
Yes,
that you can file for relief on taxes or
yes.
put it over? What would be that income?
There are 2 programs. I can think of one without too much difficulty, so you might need to help me with the second one. But there's a property tax postponement program that is administered by the State Controller's Office. They have an 800 number. We have it in our office. If you're over 62 and your income meets certain limits, you would qualify, or if you are disabled, and I don't know what percent disabled. So the property tax postponement is one, and then I think there's a program administered by the State Board of Equalization that is a homeowners relief program. Do you know what?
Well, the auditor or the tax collector had a, just go spread that out, 22, the 5 pay and things like that.
Oh, yeah, you're delinquent.
No, I don't know what the one.
Okay, I think there's one that the State Board of Equalization administers. I am not certain of what the criteria are, but I can tell you that in our office we have posters on that information, and folks come in all the time and they pick up whatever documents.
Can I go to your office, or can I call you and get that information?
You can call us and get the phone numbers, and then you can call up to the state. These are toll-free numbers, so it's no charge to you.
What was that name?
One was the State Controller's Office, the Property Tax Postponement Program, and the other one, I think, is a State Board of Equalization administered homeowners property relief or something to that effect. I don't know what theirs is called.
I promise if I call you, I'm gonna call you something nice. But a general question, that 2%, that puts a limit on you. That's the maximum.
Correct.
But if you or the supervisor prefer, they don't have to charge it up to 2%, right? They're just a limit. They can charge less.
That's not true.
Or they have to charge 2%?
Proposition 13 was very clear. Once a base year value has been established, the inflation factor is 2% or the change in the California Consumer Price Index, whichever is less. It's not discretionary.
So you could not charge less than 2% or whatever it is.
Correct.
You have to go 2%.
Yes.
Okay.
That's not entirely right. If the, whichever is less than the consumer price index went up 1.5%, you would
Right.
pay 1%.
It's whichever.
Okay, but you couldn't go, let's say, less than 1.5%.
What we couldn't do is say, well, it's 2%, but we're feeling in a really generous mood this year, so we'll only go up 0.75%.
Oh, come on.
We can't do that.
Oh my God. He might get reelected or something.
Lynn's government felt that generous. Yes, sir.
You mentioned a couple of different methods for appraisal, the square footage cost and the comps. Isn't it difficult where many of the homes, if not most of them, are custom homes, where you can't go like on a subdivision where you have 7 or 8 almost identical homes, or at least 5 or 6 different models, where you know that every 6 houses are the same? Is it difficult to apply comps? And the second half of that is it's also difficult, isn't it, to establish a square foot cost? You mentioned $200 a square foot. I didn't know whether it's hypothetical or that's
It was
the number you're using, but Do you find, where do you find this from, given the, particularly now, the construction industry is hurting, and I found myself, actually, you can get a contractor to call you back, and so that the cost of homes is probably a lot less now,
Okay, well,
per square foot.
there are three approaches to estimate value. The cost approach is one, the sales comparison approach or market approach is the second, and the third that's not used on single-family homes is the income approach. What we did was a market approach, essentially. We looked at a band of values or a range of prices per square foot, and what the appraisers were told is when in doubt, err on the conservative side. So if they had a range, say, of $198 to $220 a square foot for houses in Rancho on an acre that were 1,500 to 1,700 square feet, they erred at the lower end of the range and would have picked 200 at that point.
Where did those numbers come from?
They come from market data that we have. Now, and this is the thing that a lot of people have kind of a hard time understanding. We have the best market data you can find.
Calvert County.
We do.
The cost of construction, Calvert County.
Market data, not cost data, market data.
What was that Calvert County?
I'm making it up. I'm just telling you, they can't. And this harkens back to the pre-Prop 13 days. Now, I think Rita and I are the only two appraisers in the office who actually appraised property for property tax purposes before Prop 13 passed. And what we used to do...
What does that say about us?
It's why I colored my hair this time.
I caught mine too.
Prior to Prop 13 passing, we did mass reappraisals in a very similar manner. We would have market data in a neighborhood. We would say, okay, in general, in this neighborhood, on a half-acre site, a 1,200 to 1,300 square foot house would sell for $150 to $160 a square foot. And then we equalized it. So everybody with a 1,200 square foot house on a half acre would have had the same value, assuming the same amenities, which means the guy with the pool actually would have gotten some money out of it for the pool, but we equalized it. That's the approach we took for this assignment, because we knew if we didn't take that mass appraisal approach, we were never going to get it done. We don't have the staff, and I'm not whining here, we don't have the staff to go out on 11,000 properties, run 3 comps, do adjustments, and come up with a number at the bottom. So we equalized the values in the neighborhood. It was a very efficient way to give as much relief as we could possibly do, as fast and efficiently as we could do it.
Before Prop 13, we had to appraise every property every year, and it went to market every year. In case you don't remember that, unless you're too young to remember. But now we only go out when we change ownership or new construction. And still, we're very, very busy. And now with these Prop 8s, of course, that goes on. And one thing wasn't, let me interrupt that, wasn't clear to me, although I know it, is that say this year your property went down $80,000. We lowered it $80,000. And she mentioned that if it goes back up, you're going to get a big surprise. Well, it won't necessarily go all the way up the first year, because we look at it every year. It might incrementally go up for 5 or 6 years, and that won't be so bad. It's only when the market really recovers that you get, right, and then you don't be back to where you were 2 years ago or whatever, anyway.
With the 2% or whatever the inflation factor is.
Right.
Touching on what Gary asked, if you have a legal non-conforming residence, you can't get an appraisal to do a refinancing, how do you get around that today?
Well, the nice thing is in government, we're not doing it for refinancing, so we're not worried about what the lender wants as a box checked on a form that we don't use. We're looking at what the market data is saying a non-conforming property, single-family residence, would sell for in that condition. Okay, now, what I didn't tell you, and I just keep putting pieces of my background out there for you, I spent 10.5 years in the Contra Costa Assessor's Office, 2 years doing appeals, 4 years doing commercial, and the balance of it was doing single-family residential and ag. And then I took 12.5 years and owned my own business. So when you want to talk to me about a lending appraisal, I had appraisers who did appraisals strictly for lenders. I never did. I think they're awfully picky. How many of you work for lenders? I'm sorry for insulting you. You know, they want certain boxes checked whether they're real or not. They don't ever want a box that says rural. If it doesn't say urban or suburban, they won't float the loan. So when our appraisers are doing evaluation, they don't have that restriction. Their restriction is to look at the data that's available in these neighborhoods and come up with an opinion of value.
What other rules do you have for comparables? I'm in a situation where there's, as far as I know, absolutely nothing around. It's not a rancho, it's a very unique property. Is there a distance factor? You talk about the dates, we know about the dates, but what other?
Well, there's a distance factor per se, and that's just sort of a test of reasonableness. If you're dealing with an extremely unique property, I can tell you, let's say you have a really unique property, and one of our appraisers is appraising your property and they're having some trouble, so they're going to pull some comps, maybe from Murphy's, maybe over in Copper, maybe up between Moke Hill and West Point, because they're looking for that really unique property that matches yours. When they're doing something like that, they're going to be talking to their chief appraiser about it, and if he has any kind of inkling that it might be an issue, he's going to bring it upstairs and he's going to bounce it off my desk. Because when we start dealing with those really unique properties, we do a sort of test of reasonableness internally. If that number isn't holding sway with us, then we'll go back to the drawing board and we'll go at it from another approach.
But you're still doing market approach no matter what.
Yes. And cost approach. And if it's appropriate, income approach.
Could you tell us a little bit about commercial, being in business in the community and renting from a center? We're responsible for the taxes and
There's a pass-through.
yes,
Okay.
and if there's 100 owners and one of them sells, then it seems like it's being reassessed. At least that's what we're being told.
In a shopping center?
Value shop.
No, those aren't condos. Those aren't. Okay, let me back up. When I had my own business, I owned an office condo. So I had a parcel for my office. It was part of a larger building that's partitioned out. And I had a parcel number and I had a tax bill. But Valley Oaks is not a commercial condo project. They can move those partition walls almost anywhere they want within the confines of what their lease
I
agreement
understand, but I mean, when one owner sells, is it reassessed and the
No.
value goes up?
It's only when the ownership of the center transfers ownership, not an individual commercial tenant.
Means a partial owner of the whole center, say 50% owner, would just change hands and we come in and we die at 50%.
And that did happen a couple of years ago.
Isn't that an entity? I'm not really sure, but I know that we're responsible every time something goes up and it
Right.
kills everybody.
Because they're passing it through to you. Triple net lease with a pass-through or a common area maintenance charge.
I want to get back to the cost per square foot. You said
I'm not
you have
ignoring you, I'm just continuing like so.
Okay. You said you have a lot of market information available to you, and I kept asking you if it's Calaveras County.
Yes.
You didn't affirm that.
I'm sorry, yes, it is Calaveras
It
County.
is Calaveras County.
Right, we do not have market data from other counties, although we have the ability to, you've got to love email, right? We have email addresses of our colleagues in surrounding counties. We also have their phone numbers and talk to them pretty regularly. So if, let's go back to the unique property. Let's say we think that we've got a unique property in Murphy's or Vallecito, and we really want to go across the county line into Tuolumne and see what someone might have looked at if they were thinking about purchasing the piece. We will call Tuolumne County, and they will generally share data with us.
And I want to ask you sort of a follow-up to that one. Is that if an owner of a parcel itself builds the home, garage, whatever it is, it's going to be valued himself or herself, and has receipts, documentation, and so forth, what value do you use then? Do you still go with the comp and or the cost, not and, but or the cost?
We go with the market value at the time of completion. This happens a lot, so let me walk you all through it, because it's not super complicated. I have a piece of property that my husband and I have yet to build on. off of Burson Road that we bought in 2000. So you know what's happened on that one is the value has gone up, but the assessed value hasn't. Now let's say finally we get around to building on it. And let's say that we happen to be talented, which we're not, but let's say we happen to be talented and we can build it ourselves. And we can build it ourselves for maybe $100 a square foot. So if you put a 2,000 square foot house out for $100 a square foot, because we're just really handy, and no, we're not. And I could have potentially 200,000 into the house and 55 or 60 into the lot. What do we assess it for? What's its market value when it was completed? So if a 2,000 square foot house, and I'm going to make up numbers here, if a 2,000 square foot house on 5 acres off of Burson Road, when we completed it, was worth $400,000, and if at that point the land was worth $100,000, then we would add $300,000 for the new construction, even if it only cost us $200,000.
If I can jump in here for 1 second, that she mentioned before that the supervisors sit as the Board of Equalization, and that is the single most misunderstood issue that comes before us. You have a lot of talented couples, and they've got their families, extended families, and they're coming in and they're helping build a house, and they build it for $200,000, and they get the tax bill and it's appraised for $400,000. They say that this is, we've got the receipts, but the law doesn't allow us to give them the break of the sweat equity. And certainly, you can see in their eyes, they say, well, what would you sell it for? Well, would you sell it for $200,000? And they say, well, of course not. So, but they want the benefit. They want the benefit of the cost that it actually costs them, and they don't want to pay the taxes on the market value. So, but I've been a year and a half and been through 6 appeal hearings, and there's always at least one that is confused about that, and you can certainly understand why they would be.
Yes, sir.
My property is in a heavy preserve. I've been reassessed 3 times now. My taxes have gone up 3 years in a row. The first was when I built the home. Second one, we had a termination of life estate. And then again, they were out 3-4 months ago. So I just got the notice, the estate clause, is that what you call it? So my taxes have gone up every single year. With this market of the last 3 years, a 30% decrease, how can my property taxes go
Okay,
up?
Williamson Act is handled ever so slightly differently. We go into a whole other set of not only the government
That's why I'll
code,
wait till the end.
but the R&T code. I don't think we're at the end. I still see hands going up. In the case of Williamson Act, you got to have a certain size of property in order to go into Williamson Act. What you can do is you can carve out a home site. So once you start construction on a house, we carve out the home site. That no longer has your protected base under Williamson Act. It's got the protected base from what you originally paid for it. So let's say you got 160 acres and you carve out a 10-acre home site. 150 acres is going to be valued consistent with Williamson Act, and the 10 acres is going to have the factored base year value that was established when you acquired it. Then you build. Okay, that value goes on to that home site. What a lot of folks who are in Williamson Act don't realize is every year we look at the Williamson Act values. Every year the risk factors change, the cap rates that we develop based on the information we get from the State Board of Equalization changes, and if rates go down, values go up. It's taken me years to just remember it that fast because it doesn't make sense.
Well, I've got it leased out because of the cost of fuel and fees. I can't raise the rent.
And we do understand that. Now, to compound things, you mentioned a life estate. This life estate issue is coming up at least once a week right now. Remember when I said when Prop 13 passed, it basically said if there's a change of ownership, you get reappraised? The termination of a life estate, either because the life estate holder died or the life estate holder released their interest, the termination of a life estate is a reappraisable event. So you got a home site carved out that would have jumped the value up. You had risk factors changing every year, so your Williamson Act acreage was changing every year, and I don't know that it was kept going up, but it could change every year. you had new construction, and then you had a change of ownership that would have affected that home site value, would have affected the underlying factor base value. Now, in Williamson Act, the other thing, when we started this discussion, I said we're required to enroll the lesser of current market value or factored base value. For Williamson Act, we're required to enroll the lesser of current market value, factored base value, or restricted value. Because that's what Williamson Act is, it's a restriction. So we've got a third number to throw in there, and we have a pretty effective computer system that's
I mean,
monitoring
it's
that.
substantially has gone up. We built in 204, and then Mr. Hawk passed away in 2006.
And we didn't know about it, as I recall.
I'm sure you did.
Well, I'll tell you, when you get a notice of escape, it means something happened that either we didn't know about because you didn't tell us, or we didn't know about because we flat out missed it. And I'm not going to stand up here and tell you we're perfect. I'll tell you I'm perfect. Shannon